Hi, my friends. We're going to talk a little bit today about icebergs. I have a book that tells us a lot about ice. Now, why would we be talking about ice? Maybe because we are traveling to the coldest, iciest place on Earth, Antarctica. Let's find out what this book can tell us. It says Icebergs, written by Jane Elliott. We'll open it up and we see a picture of a big iceberg. Today, there is ice that has formed over much of the world. We call it ice caps, glaciers, icebergs, and pack ice. But most of the ice occurs at the tips or poles of the Earth. There are two regions called the Arctic and the Antarctic. The Arctic is at the North Pole at the top of the Earth, and the Antarctic is at the South Pole, the bottom of the Earth. We are talking this week about the bottom, the South Pole, Antarctica. The Antarctic region. The South Pole lies in the middle of a huge ice-covered land called Antarctica. There is thick ice at the Antarctica region. The Antarctic is the coldest place on Earth. The coldest place on Earth. You can see that ice right there. Fewer animals and plants live in the Antarctic region than in the Arctic. Penguins and seals are animals that do live on the land in the Antarctic. The people who live there are mostly scientists. They do research there to learn about the animals and the land. So there's not really people that live there year-round just to be living there. Far too cold and icy. But scientists do live there, and they will live there and they will do experiments and research, and they're the ones that tell us all these wonderful things about the penguins and the animals that live there and the ice. Glaciers. See that picture? Glaciers are huge rivers of ice that slowly flow down mountains. So this is the mountain, and the ice has flowed down the mountain. Move my light a little bit so maybe you can see it better. Oh. There we go. There are many glaciers in the Arctic and the Antarctic regions. The glaciers slowly travel down mountains into the sea. So they travel down these mountains into the sea. Those are called glaciers. Ice shelves. When the ice reaches the sea, it keeps pushing out into the sea. It can make a huge floating ice shelf on the water. A shelf made out of ice. Sometimes a big chunk of ice breaks off from an ice shelf. It falls rumbling into the sea and floats away. Now it is called an iceberg. So icebergs break off from the ice shelves, and that's how you become an iceberg. And when these break off of the ice shelf, they say it is so loud. You can hear it so loud. And I have seen some videos and I have heard it. You should try to see if your family can maybe help you find one. And I can try to find one for you to watch too. It's really amazing to hear them and see them come apart from the ice shelf and turn into a floating iceberg. An iceberg may look small, but it is actually very, very big. Only a small part of an iceberg floats above the water. Most of the iceberg floats underwater where it is out of sight. So you can see in this picture, this is the iceberg, but above the water is only a little piece of it. And below it, it is much, much bigger than what we can see. They say about 90% of the iceberg is under the water and only about 10% is above the water. So you might see this iceberg and think that's big, but it is enormous. All of this is attached to it under the water. So most of an iceberg is Above the water or below the water? Above the water. Some icebergs are gigantic. They can be as tall as skyscrapers and even as wide as a whole state, like the whole state. A whole state, it could be that big. The biggest iceberg ever sighted was as big as Belgium and larger than the state of Maryland. So a whole state, the iceberg could take up all that space. Icebergs slowly melt as they float into warmer seas. They can take more than 2 years to melt away. Can you imagine an iceberg that takes 2 years before it melts away? As an iceberg floats along, the wind and the weather will carve the ice into strange shapes. So this is an iceberg that's been floating out in the water. The wind comes, the water pushes against it, and it's made like an opening, like a cave, like a tunnel, an arch. That was made by the wind and the weather. And here it says, scientists use radar to watch for large icebergs floating in the paths of ships. Yes, what if ships need to take some things down there to the scientists, but there's icebergs everywhere? Well, the scientists will use radar to watch for the large icebergs floating in the paths of the ships. And sometimes ships like this icebreaker work with the helicopters on ice patrol. They make sure that there are no icebergs around that can endanger or hurt the passing ships. So this helicopter is watching and is telling the ship, careful over here, turn this way, go that way, there's an iceberg, go around this way. So the helicopter is on a radio probably with the ship captain guiding him and telling him how to go around the iceberg. The helicopters can fly out over the sea, and the pilot of the helicopter will tell all of the ships the position of the icebergs. Sometimes there are icebreakers. Let's see if it talks about the icebreakers. In the polar region, seawater freezes into big sheets of ice in the winter. This is called pack ice. So these are the sheets of ice that freeze. So that is the sheets of water that freezes, and they call them ice sheets. Sometimes the pack ice jams together and it will block the ships from passing through. Oh no, the ship has to come in to bring supplies to the scientist. The ships have to get there. So then they will get super strong ships out called the icebreaker ships, the strongest ships, icebreaker ships. And those icebreaker ships will come out and they will break up the icebergs and they will make a path for the smaller ships so that the smaller ships can get through and bring the supplies to the scientists, the people on Antarctica. Good thing we have icebreakers. Okay, and here's a few words for us. Glacier. What is a glacier? Well, it's a slow-moving river of ice. Ice cap, a large area of ice that is always there. That's at the North Pole and the South Pole. Ice shelf, a thick sheet of floating ice that has been pushed out into the ocean by a glacier, an ice shelf. And an iceberg, that's what we've been talking about, a large block of ice that has broken off an ice shelf. It's broken off the ice shelf and it's just floating out there. Pack ice, that is floating sea ice that forms in the water. So next week when we come to school, we'll see if we can remember some of this information about icebergs. And I wanted to show you what an iceberg might look like if we could try to think of one at home. How could I find an iceberg at home to show you? I'm going to look in my freezer. So I'm going to go over to my freezer and I'm going to see if I have any ice and I'm going to see if I have any water. So I found a cup of water. So this is just clear water And we're going to pretend like this is the ocean or the sea around Antarctica. And now there's been a glacier that's come down to the water, and off of that glacier has broken a big piece of ice, an iceberg now. So if this was an iceberg and it goes into the water, how much of it can you see above the water? You can only see a very little bit of it sticking out. Right there, you can see a little bit of that sticking out of the water. But look at all of that iceberg that's under the water. That's the part you don't see. So that is what they have to be careful of when the ships are traveling to Antarctica to take the scientists down there, to take supplies down there. They might just see a little piece of ice floating. What looks small, but what's underneath it? All of that big ice. Yes. And you can do that little experiment at home to see how much of the ice or the iceberg you can see above the water. When we come back to school, I think we should make some icebergs and put them in our science table and see if we can float some icebergs in some cold water like Antarctica. So I want to get that ready for us next week when we come back. That would be fun to do. So I'm going to let you go for now, and I will see you next time. Stay warm, my friends.